And welcome everybody to day two of the great upshift. And here I've lit the candle. So the light is on, the light is shining. And I'm going to share my screen for about 10 minutes to give a brief overview of my take on upshifting our thinking. Here's the cover of our book, for those of you who haven't seen it, The Great Upshift, Humanity's Coming Advance Towards Peace and Harmony on the Planet. And I'd just like to make a few introductory remarks and to contrast the Great Upshift with the Great Reset, which we're all familiar with since 2020. So there's a general agreement that crises are opportunities, but what is the crisis an opportunity for? And there's an agreement, I think, between our view and World Economic Forum / UN / the corporates that we are in a systemic crisis, a polycrisis, even a permacrisis that requires a transformative systems change. However, there is a fundamental divergence between the two approaches that are being taken. And oddly enough, just today, I received two books, and one of them was this, called The Age of the Heart, The Birth of a New Heaven and a New Earth, and the other one was The Controligarchs, which represents the Great Reset. And I thought it was rather amusing that these books should have arrived on the same day. And later in the next session, you'll hear from, hopefully, Kees van der Pijl, who wrote an excellent book called States of Emergency. We seem to have been in a state of emergency permanently for quite some time. So the way that I would characterize the differences, and I got separate slides on this, is that the Great Reset is an outside-in, top-down approach. Build back better. How many times did you hear that said by different politicians during the pandemic? Whereas the Great Upshift is an inside-out, bottom-up, grassroots movement. And I just contextualize this with Peter Dunov, the Bulgarian sage, who said the current culture is one of intelligence, while the new culture will be based on love. So the principal driver of the transhumanist view is technology. And we talked a bit about this yesterday, particularly Kingsley Dennis. And human beings are seen as complex biological machines or hackable animals in need of upgrades and implants. The thinking is mechanistic, using engineering metaphors, for instance, materialistic, reductionist, hierarchical, and global. Fundamental values, I think, are intelligence, power, and wealth. You may well think of others, but these, I think, are pretty fundamental. Governance is centralized command and control, which is based on 19th century physics, involving tracking, eventually surveillance, monitoring, manipulation through behavioral psychology, nudging, and so on, and power over, not power with. And I think the approach is fundamentally artificial and works against life in general. You're talking about antibiotics, you talk about pesticides and insecticides, where the side is to kill. And this is now reaching its limits, in my view, especially in agriculture and food. And it aims at an imposed mechanical uniformity. This is the phrase from Lewis Mumford. I contrast this with transcendence, where consciousness shift is the main driver, not technology, but consciousness shift. This is what we've been talking about. So the human being, as Ervin said yesterday, is psychophysical or psycho-spiritual. There are different dimensions to the human being. We're not just hackable animals or complex machines. The thinking behind this is organismic, process, relational, spiritual, holistic, holarchical, not hierarchical. We're not talking about a pyramid of power here. Glocal, which is a sort of neologism for local and global at the same time, but glocal. Holotropic, as Ervin suggested yesterday, and it expresses the inherent élan vital of evolution, of which we ourselves are expressions. And I think the fundamental values are love, wisdom, and service as expressions of the one life, the one mind, the one planet, and the one heart. And the heart is very much part, the feminine, the heart is very much part of this upshift, where it really has no role to play at all in the Great Reset, which is technocratic and left hemisphere, as Ian McGilchrist would say. Our approach to governance is decentralized, local, self-organizing, networked, and it represents power with rather than power over. It's an approach that is natural as opposed to artificial, regenerative, healing, and it works with life. And if we're putting all this together, then as Kingsley said yesterday, we need a human-centered technology. And it aims at, and this is Lewis Mumford as well, called Transformations of Man, this is his book, aims at unity and diversity, not mechanical uniformity, and at harmony and peace. Now, this slide might surprise you a bit. I use the Lord's Prayer every day. And so every day, or even twice a day, I say, thy kingdom come, thy will be done. And so the kingdom of God, you could say, that's the Christian version of the great upshift. And the interesting thing is Jesus was very ambivalent in ways to exactly what he meant by kingdom of God. And so sometimes he said the kingdom of God is within you as a state of consciousness, as identity with the divine. And sometimes he said the kingdom of God is among you or between you. And so you share it. There's something that's shared. It's the one mind, the one life that we share. And this is the kingdom of God is between us. And so the way I interpret this is that with a kingdom within is gnosis, is realizing that we are essentially the divine and expressions of the same one divine consciousness, or what Thomas Troward would call self-recognition, which is recognizing that we are fundamentally also the self. We are individualizations of the universal self with a capital S. And this, as Peter Dunoff would put it, is unity known and felt, which is divine consciousness in his scheme of evolution. And his ethic is expressed in this very short sentence: love is life for the whole. Love is life for the whole, which is service, which is self-giving, which is self-fulfillment. And he said this, the supreme goal of human life is that people should be free and to serve love, wisdom, and truth. The supreme goal of human life is that people should be free and to serve love, wisdom, and truth. I'm just going to stop sharing, and I'm going to read you one of my recent poems, which is relevant to this theme. And it's called Lay Down Your Flags. And it's inspired by a conversation between Michal Halef, who lost her son in the Hamas attack, and Charles Eisenstein. And if you haven't listened to this extraordinary interview, and at one point she says this, lay down your flags. So here's my poem, which is prefaced by Bertrand Russell and Albert Einstein, who in the initial anti-nuclear campaign, 1950s, they said this: remember your humanity and forget the rest. Remember your humanity and forget the rest. Lay down your flags. Lay off your beliefs. Surrender allegiance to arms. Abandon affiliation to violence. Renounce retribution and revenge. Let go of separation. Let us embrace our differences. Let us celebrate our unity in diversity. We are one, yet not the same. We are unique, yet we are one. We are timeless, and yet in time, embodied and embedded in each other. Loving and suffering, extending and contracting, longing yet fulfilled, in love and loss, in loss and love, in wounds and openings alike. Lay down your flags, let go of the past, surrender justification, give way to humanity. Make space for forgiveness. Touch your enemy with tenderness, with a courageous heart. Reach out over the trenches. Dissolve your hatred. Dispel your fears. Disperse your darkness. Be present to grace, to the challenge of growth, to the alchemy of the impossible. Break through breakdown, to the aspirations of your soul for fullness, for openness, for living realization of union and communion. That peace that passes understanding, that transcends polarization and division, the deepest yearning of the human spirit, seeking to come home at last, remembering what we have forgotten, recovering our pristine essence, restoring the once and future kingdom of love together.